Tonight, we explore what lies beyond the surface of well-known beliefs. Not secrets meant to frighten, but truths gently hidden in ancient writings. As the world grows quiet, these old stories are allowed to speak once more. Before the waters rose, before the firmament trembled beneath the weight of judgment, the earth knew an age unlike any other. It was a time when the boundary between heaven and soil grew thin, and the order set at the dawn of creation was quietly undone. In those ancient days, the sons of heaven walked among the daughters of men, and from their union came beings of great stature and renown. They were called Nephilim. Their names were remembered in whispers long after their bones returned to dust. This age did not begin in chaos. It began in order. The Most High had measured the heavens, fixed the stars in their courses, and placed guardians over the world of men. Each realm had its place. Each being had its boundary. Yet desire stirred where obedience once rested, and knowledge meant to remain hidden was drawn down into the world below. Cities rose where altars once stood. Power gathered into the hands of the mighty. The Nephilim became rulers, teachers, and warriors, shaping an empire not marked by borders but by influence. Their strength was unmatched. Their wisdom was feared. Their dominion spread across the earth like a long shadow at dusk. Ancient writings speak of this time with sorrow and restraint. The Book of Enoch tells of watchers who abandoned their station. The words of Genesis speak briefly, yet with weight, of violence filling the land. Something precious had been lost, though the world continued to turn. What began as enlightenment became corruption. What promised greatness yielded decay. Was the fall of this empire sudden, or had it been unfolding since the first forbidden descent? Did judgment arrive as punishment alone, or as a final mercy to a creation groaning under its burden? This story is not told in haste. It unfolds as the years once did, slowly, deliberately, beneath the patient gaze of heaven. It is the memory of a world that could not endure, and the reason the flood became necessary. The echoes of that age still rest beneath the surface of Scripture, waiting to be heard in quiet hours when the mind grows still and the past speaks without strain. In the first long ages after the earth was formed, there was balance. The heavens held their courses without strain, and the ground yielded its strength without resistance. Light rose and faded in measured rhythm. Seasons moved gently, without excess or violence. Nothing hurried. Nothing decayed in haste. Creation rested within the order spoken into it at the beginning. The earth was wide and unbroken. Rivers moved through open lands, feeding valleys where life multiplied without fear. Forests stood deep and undisturbed. Mountains rose as silent witnesses, their peaks untouched by ambition. The air itself seemed to carry memory, as though every breath recalled the voice that first called all things into being. Humanity increased upon the land, not as scattered people, but as extended families bound by memory. Generations overlapped, and wisdom was not lost between fathers and sons. Long life preserves knowledge. The deeds of ancestors were not distant tales, but living recollections. The first commands given to humankind were still known, still spoken, still understood. The Creator was not forgotten, nor was his design unknown. Conscience guided daily life more than law. The sense of right and wrong was not enforced by power but carried within the heart. Work was steady and unforced. The ground responded to care. The keeping of flocks, the tending of fields, and the shaping of tools were acts of cooperation with the earth, not domination over it. Strength existed, but it was not worshipped. Authority existed, but it was not seized. Above this world, the heavens remained ordered and distinct. Each realm had its place. The lights of the sky followed their appointed paths. The unseen hosts fulfilled their tasks without interruption. Messengers moved as they were sent. Watchers observed as they were commanded. They did not rule the earth, nor did they alter its course. Their purpose was to witness, to preserve order, and to ensure that what had been spoken remained in effect. These watchers were bound by limits. They were given knowledge but not freedom to shape creation by desire. They were given awareness but not authority to interfere. Their role was one of restraint. In this restraint, harmony endured. Heaven remained above. Earth remained below. Each reflected the other without confusion. Time itself moved differently in those days. Years passed without erosion of memory. Faces aged slowly. The passing of seasons did not carry the weight of loss. Death existed, but it did not dominate thought. Life unfolded with patience. The future did not press upon the present. Each generation lived with awareness of its place within a greater order that had not changed since the beginning. This was the spiritual architecture of the world before the waters, not merely land and sky, but boundaries upheld by trust. The Most High had entrusted his creation to structure rather than force. Obedience sustained what power never could. The earth did not require domination to remain fruitful. The heavens did not require constant correction to remain faithful. Peace in this age was not loud. It did not announce itself. It rested quietly in the alignment of all things. The calm beauty of the world was not fragile by design, but it depended upon faithfulness. Every role is fulfilled without envy. Every boundary was honored without complaint. This harmony did not arise from fear, but from understanding. Yet balance, though strong, was delicate. Order endured only so long as trust remained unbroken. What had been given freely could also be abandoned. What was sustained by obedience could be undone by desire. The world before the waters stood complete, whole, and unguarded by force, because force was not yet required. This was what existed before rebellion took root. This was what stood to be lost. Within this ordered world, the boundaries between realms were neither hidden nor feared. Heaven was not distant, yet it was not accessible. Earth was not abandoned, yet it was not sovereign. Each existed under the authority of the one who had formed both. This separation was not a barrier of hostility, but a design of peace. Distinction preserved harmony. The unseen realm moved with purpose. Messengers carried instruction without alteration. Watchers remained at their stations, observing the course of humanity as guardians of balance. Their presence was not for intervention, but for testimony. They bore witness to the unfolding of creation, recording the faithfulness of the earth and the obedience of those placed upon it. Their knowledge was vast, yet restrained. Their awareness was complete, yet bound. These beings did not act by impulse. They were shaped by command. Their existence reflected order rather than ambition. In their restraint, the pattern of heaven remained stable. There was no rivalry among them, no striving for prominence. Each understood the weight of transgression and the cost of overreach. Their silence was as meaningful as their movement. Below them, humanity lived under the same principle of appointed place. Men and women were not rulers of the earth by conquest, but stewards by permission. The land responded to care, not coercion. Fields yielded because they were tended, not because they were forced. Animals lived alongside humankind without terror. Fear had not yet entered the natural order as a ruling force. Memory played a sacred role in this age. The earliest generations carried knowledge forward without distortion. The words spoken at creation were not distant myths. They were preserved through lived experience. Fathers taught sons not only how to labor, but how to remember. Mothers spoke of beginnings not as legend, but as inheritance. This continuity guarded humanity against confusion. Names carried meaning. Lineage mattered. Identity was not constructed by desire, but received through belonging. Each generation understood itself as part of an unfolding design rather than a break from the past. There was humility in this awareness. Progress was not measured by novelty, but by faithfulness. The long lifespans of this age were not given for indulgence but for preservation. Time allowed wisdom to deepen. Error could be corrected before it multiplied. Reflection softened impulse. Consequences unfolded slowly, allowing space for restraint. Hastiness had little ground to grow. In this environment, power was subdued. Strength did not define worth. Authority was tied to responsibility rather than dominance. Those who led did so by example, not by fear. Disputes were rare, and when they arose, they were settled within the community rather than through violence. The shedding of blood was not common, nor was it accepted. Above all, reverence shaped thought. The Creator was acknowledged not through ritual alone, but through alignment with His design. The heavens were respected. The earth was honored. Life was received as a gift, not a possession. This reverence sustained the invisible structure that held the world in place. Yet even in this harmony, choice remained. Obedience was not enforced. Boundaries were not guarded by threat. The freedom to remain faithful also carried the freedom to depart. Trust, by its nature, allowed for refusal. This was the risk built into creation. The Watchers observed this freedom closely. They understood its necessity and its danger. They knew that love required choice, and choice allowed deviation. Still, their role was to witness, not to interfere. The balance of the world depended upon this restraint. Thus the pre-flood age stood complete, upheld by obedience freely given, nothing compelled. Loyalty, nothing restrained desire except understanding. The system worked because each being remained within its place. Heaven watched, earth flourished. The boundary between them remained clear. But clarity alone could not prevent longing. Awareness alone could not extinguish desire. The structure of peace, though perfect in design, depended upon the continued willingness of all within it. When even one part began to drift, the strain was felt across the whole. The world before the waters remained calm, yet the conditions for fracture quietly gathered. The stability of that ancient world rested upon unseen agreements. They were not written upon stone, nor enforced by decree. They existed as understanding. Each realm knew its measure. Each role carried limits that were neither burdensome nor unclear. As long as these limits were honored, creation moved in quiet strength. The heavens, though vast, did not intrude upon the earth. The earth, though fertile, did not seek what was above it. This separation preserved clarity. It allowed each domain to reflect the will of the Creator without distortion. The Watchers remained within their stations, their gaze steady, their purpose unchanged. Their obedience upheld the silence that kept order intact. Human life unfolded within this shelter of restraint. Children were born into households rich with memory. Elders were not set aside, for their knowledge anchored the present to the past. The long passage of years did not dull awareness. Instead, it sharpened it. The weight of experience taught patience. The slow turning of generations discouraged excess. Work carried dignity. Labor was not punishment but participation. To cultivate the earth was to echo the act of creation itself. The shaping of tools, the raising of dwellings, and the keeping of animals were all done within measure. Nothing demanded haste. Nothing sought to surpass its purpose. The natural world mirrored this order. The earth yielded what was required and no more. The waters remained within their courses. The skies brought rain in its season. There was no contest between elements. The harmony of creation was visible in its restraint. Strength was present, yet it did not overwhelm. This balance extended into thought and desire. Ambition had not yet taken root as a guiding force. The pursuit of greatness was tempered by awareness of limitation. Honor was found in faithfulness, not expansion. Identity rested in belonging, not in conquest. The idea of mastery over others had little place within the shared memory of humanity. The Watchers observed this alignment with solemn care. They were aware of the fragility beneath its calm surface. They understood that order sustained by choice could be undone by longing, yet they also knew that interference would corrupt what they were appointed to protect. Their obedience required restraint even in the presence of risk. This trust placed in both heaven and earth revealed the nature of the Creator's design. Authority was not exercised through constant control, but through confidence in obedience. Creation was allowed to function as intended, free from coercion. This freedom was the measure of its beauty and the source of its vulnerability. The world before the waters did not anticipate its own end. There were no signs written in the sky, no warnings carved into the land. The calm of the age concealed the possibility of collapse. Peace had become familiar. Order was assumed. The memory of chaos no longer guided caution. Yet the seeds of imbalance do not announce themselves. They arise quietly within thought before action. A boundary questioned becomes a boundary weakened. A role reimagined becomes a role abandoned. The structure that held the world together did not shatter suddenly. It began to thin. This chapter of existence stands as testimony to what was entrusted and what was risked. The beauty of the early world was not naive. It was deliberate. It was complete. And it depended entirely upon continued obedience rather than force. When that obedience would one day falter, the loss would not be measured only in judgment, but in the disappearance of this quiet, ordered world. The memory of it endures as a reminder of what once stood without fear, before the waters covered the earth and silence followed. Before the earth knew corruption, the heavens were ordered with care. Each realm was set in place by command, and every being within it was given measure and limit. Among these were the Watchers, spirits appointed to observe the world below. Their presence was not accidental, nor was their authority undefined. They stood as witnesses between heaven and earth, holding neither dominion nor ownership, but responsibility. The ancient writings speak of them with restraint. They are not described as rulers nor as architects of creation. They did not shape land or breathe life into flesh. Their task was to see, to record, and to preserve order by faithfulness. They raised servants of balance. Their strength lay not in action but in obedience. In the Book of Enoch, these beings are named Watchers because they were set to watch. They observed the progress of humanity, the growth of generations, and the keeping of the commands given at the beginning. They were entrusted with knowledge of divine order, yet bound from using that knowledge to alter the course of the world. Their authority was real, but it was restrained. Their awareness was deep, but their will was submitted. Hierarchy governed their existence. Above them stood higher authority. Below them rested the world of flesh. They were neither equal to the Most High nor aligned with humanity. This distance preserved clarity. Each realm remained distinct, and peace flowed from this distinction. The Watchers were not meant to bridge the worlds, but to guard the boundary between them. Their obedience maintained harmony not through force, but through presence. The knowledge that heaven observed the earth carried weight, even when unseen. Order did not require constant intervention. It required faithfulness. In this role, the Watchers fulfilled their calling without disturbance for long ages. Restraint was their defining mark. Though they possessed strength beyond human measure, they did not exercise it freely. Though they understood mysteries hidden from flesh, they did not reveal them. Power was held in trust, not displayed. Their dignity rested in limitation, not expansion. This restraint reflected the wisdom of divine hierarchy. Authority was never given without boundary. Knowledge was never separated from accountability. The Watchers were not permitted to act on desire, only on command. Their obedience preserved the design set at creation, where each being flourished by remaining within its appointed place. Yet awareness carries weight. To see continually is to know continually. The watchers observed humanity not from a distance of ignorance but with clear understanding. They saw life unfold slowly upon the earth. They witnessed the bonds of family, the patience of generations, and the intimacy shared among those of flesh. These observations were not sinful, yet they carried risk. Over time, attention became contemplation. Contemplation deepened into reflection. Reflection, when unguarded, can open the door to comparison. The watchers knew what they were not. They knew what they could not possess. This knowledge alone did not lead to rebellion, but it introduced tension. The ancient texts speak carefully here. Dissatisfaction did not erupt suddenly. It did not announce itself through defiance or speech. It arose quietly as longing, a desire not yet acted upon, a question not yet spoken aloud. The structure of obedience remained intact, but the stillness within it began to shift. This longing did not come from need, but from curiosity, not from deprivation, but from attention turned inward. The watchers were not deprived of purpose. They were entrusted with it. Yet the nearness of the human world stirred thoughts that were never meant to be entertained. Power without humility is not always loud. Often it begins as imagination, the idea that more could be known, the thought that more could be experienced. The boundary remained, but it began to feel narrow to those who gazed upon it too long. Thus, within the ordered heavens, the first quiet strain appeared. Nothing had yet changed upon the earth. No command had been broken. No descent had occurred. But the foundation of restraint had been tested within the heart. Rebellion does not begin with action. It begins with desire unexamined. The watchers still stood in their appointed place. Order still held. Yet the harmony that depended upon willing obedience now carried the weight of unspoken longing. The presence of longing did not immediately disturb the heavens. Order remained visible. The watchers continued their appointed tasks. The courses of the stars were not altered. The rhythms of earth below remained unchanged. Yet within the unseen realm, something subtle had shifted. Awareness, once held in balance, had begun to lean inward. The watchers were created with clarity of mind and breadth of perception. They understood patterns of creation in ways unseen by flesh. They perceived time without urgency and distance without separation. Such knowledge was not a burden when aligned with obedience. But knowledge invites reflection, and reflection invites interpretation. When interpretation drifts from command, strain begins. Hierarchy had been established to guard against this drift. Authority flowed downward, not outward. Each watcher was accountable to higher command. This structure was not meant to suppress, but to preserve. Within it, freedom existed without chaos. Outside it, freedom dissolved into disorder. The longing that emerged among some watchers did not challenge hierarchy directly. It did not question the authority above them. Instead, it questioned the boundary. Before them, the distinction between heaven and earth, once understood as protection, began to appear as distance. What had been accepted became examined. What had been trusted became measured. They observed humanity closely. They saw beings of flesh bound by time, yet rich in experience. Humans labored, rested, rejoiced, and mourned. Their lives unfolded within limits, yet those limits gave shape to meaning. The watchers saw that humanity's weakness also carried intimacy. Their mortality sharpened attachment. Their fragility intensified connection. These observations were not sinful in themselves. Witnessing was their role. But when attention lingered without restraint, perception shifted. The watchers began to compare. Not openly, not collectively, but within thought. They measured what they were against what they saw. They considered what they possessed against what they lacked. This comparison introduced imbalance. The watchers were not meant to evaluate their place by observing another's. Their fulfillment was designed to come from obedience, not experience. Yet the human world, rich with sensation and relational closeness, appeared full in ways heaven was not meant to imitate. The ancient texts do not accuse all watchers. Many remained faithful, anchored by understanding. But among some, curiosity grew. Curiosity does not always seek rebellion. Often it seeks comprehension. Yet comprehension pursued outside of command becomes dangerous. It presses against limits rather than honoring them. Silence played a role in this change. The longing was not confessed. It was not spoken upward. It remained internal, nourished by contemplation. What is unspoken can grow without correction. What is hidden is rarely examined by others. Thus, dissatisfaction remained unchecked. The watchers still acted in obedience. They did not intervene. They did not descend. Their actions remained pure, but the inward posture that sustained obedience had begun to weaken. Faithfulness remained, yet it was no longer effortless. Restraint required intention rather than instinct. Power, when joined with humility, preserves order. Power, when joined with desire, seeks expression. The watchers possessed immense strength, yet it was designed to remain unused. Strength without use is stable only when purpose is clear. When purpose is questioned, strength seeks release. The structure of heaven relied upon willing submission. It did not enforce loyalty through threat. It assumed faithfulness through understanding. This design revealed trust, but it also revealed vulnerability. Even among beings formed in light, freedom allowed deviation. The watchers had not yet crossed the boundary. Heaven remained intact. Earth remained untouched. Yet the inner alignment that preserved separation had begun to loosen. The danger lay not in what had been done, but in what had been imagined. Thus, the heavens stood outwardly unchanged, while inwardly unsettled among a few. The appointed place of the watchers still held them, but it no longer satisfied all. The quiet tension within the unseen realm prepared the ground for movement that would later reshape the earth. The order of heaven endured because obedience remained unbroken. Yet obedience sustained only by memory and not by contentment grows fragile. The watchers who carried longing within themselves did not yet act, but the weight of restraint increased. What had once been natural now required effort. What had once been settled now invited reconsideration. This quiet strain revealed the nature of rebellion in its earliest form. It did not arise as hatred of authority, nor as rejection of the Most High. It emerged as a shift in perception. The appointed place, once received as sufficient, began to feel incomplete. The boundary that preserved peace began to appear as a limitation. The watchers were not ignorant of consequence. They understood judgment. They knew the permanence of divine decree. Their awareness did not shield them from desire, but it delayed action. Knowledge restrained impulse, even as it failed to remove longing. Thus, tension remained suspended between understanding and imagination. Within divine hierarchy, humility was the stabilizing force. The watchers had been formed to reflect this humility through submission. Yet humility must be renewed continually. When humility gives way to self-examination, obedience becomes conditional. The watchers did not yet reject their role, but some began to reinterpret it. They reasoned inwardly about purpose. They considered whether observation alone fulfilled the fullness of existence. They reflected upon their nearness to humanity and questioned whether distance was required. These thoughts did not yet violate command, but they softened reverence. What is softened becomes vulnerable. The silence of heaven allowed this process to unfold. No correction was issued because no action had yet occurred. Divine order does not respond to thought with fork. It waits for a choice. The watchers were not driven, but permitted to remain as they were, holding both obedience and desire within the same being. This coexistence could not endure indefinitely. Desire unexamined does not remain neutral. It seeks resolution. The watchers stood at the edge of this tension, still within their appointed place, yet no longer resting fully within it. The ancient record speaks of this moment with restraint. It does not dramatize the heavens. It does not portray immediate conflict. Instead, it presents a slow divergence of will. A few among many began to lean away from the structure that held them. Their dissatisfaction was not born of injustice. Nothing had been taken from them. It arose from attention turned inward and downward rather than upward. The watchers gazed too long upon the world they were meant only to observe. Their role shifted from witness to contemplator, and contemplation without humility leads to distortion. This moment reveals the danger of power detached from submission. Even beings formed in light are not immune to inward drift. Authority without self-restraint seeks expansion. Knowledge without obedience seeks expression. The watchers were given much, and thus their responsibility was great. Still, heaven remained ordered. The breach had not yet occurred. The boundary between realms stood intact. Earth continued in peace, unaware of the tension above it. Humanity lived under the shelter of a design not yet broken. This chapter closes in stillness, not collapse. The watchers remained in place. The heavens held. Yet the inner alignment that sustained harmony had weakened among some. What followed would not arise from sudden rebellion, but from a desire allowed to mature without restraint. Thus, the appointed place of the watchers stands as both a gift and warning. Order is preserved not by force, but by humility. When humility fades, even slowly, the foundation of peace begins to shift. The world below had not yet changed, but the unseen realm had already begun to move. The boundary between heaven and earth had been established at the beginning. It was not formed by distance alone, but by purpose. Each realm reflected the will of the Most High in its own way. Heaven was ordered by command. Earth was shaped by growth. Between them stood a separation that preserved life, meaning, and peace. For a long age, this boundary remained untouched. The watchers observed without crossing. Humanity lived without intrusion. The design held not because it was enforced, but because it was honored. Yet honor, once weakened by longing, no longer carries the same weight. The descent did not come as thunder. It did not tear the heavens open. It unfolded quietly, as many tragedies do. The ancient record speaks of decision before movement. Those watchers who carried dissatisfaction did not act alone. They gathered. They spoke among themselves. What had lived as private thought became a shared resolve. An oath was taken, not lightly and not without awareness of consequence. The Book of Enoch preserves this moment with solemn restraint. The watchers bound themselves together, knowing that retreat would become impossible once the boundary was crossed. The oath did not create rebellion, but it sealed it. What had been imagined now became chosen. They descended upon Mount Hermon, a place that would carry the memory of this act long after the event itself passed into silence. The mountain did not call them. The earth did not invite them. Their arrival was not welcomed by creation, for creation had not been made for such union. This descent was not an act of curiosity alone. It was a rejection of the appointed place. The watchers stepped beyond witness into participation. In doing so, they abandoned restraint. Heaven no longer remained above. Earth no longer remained untouched. The distinction that preserved harmony was breached. Their union with human women is spoken of with gravity, not fascination. It is presented as distortion rather than desire fulfilled. What was formed from this union did not belong fully to either realm. The offspring carried strength beyond human measure and awareness not meant for flesh. They were called Nephilim. These beings are often remembered for their size and power, yet this was not their defining mark. Their existence itself testified to imbalance. They stood as living evidence that a boundary had been violated. Their presence altered the rhythm of the earth. They were not evil by creation, but disordered by origin. The transgression lay not in strength, nor in form, but in violation of design. Power had crossed where it was never meant to dwell. Knowledge had entered a realm unable to bear it. The Watchers had not created life as the Creator does. They had disrupted it. With this act, heaven and earth were no longer distinct. What had been separated for peace now mingled in confusion. The Watchers did not lose their awareness, but they lost their position. Humanity did not gain wisdom but inherited burden. Creation itself began to feel strain. The descent altered more than lineage. It altered authority. The Watchers had stepped outside command. The Nephilim would grow outside order. What followed was not immediate collapse but steady unraveling. Consequences rarely arrive all at once. They spread outward, touching thought, structure, and life itself. This moment stands as a turning point, not because of spectacle but because of loss. A boundary once honored was now broken. The quiet architecture of creation had been compromised. The world would continue to turn, but it would no longer turn as it once had. This was the descent that reshaped the age, not marked by noise but by breach, not driven by hatred but by desire left unchecked. From this moment forward, the balance of the world could not be restored without judgment. The earth did not resist the descent, yet it did not receive it in peace. Creation had not been formed to bear such mingling. The ground remained firm beneath their feet, but the order beneath the surface had been disturbed. What entered the world carried authority without permission and knowledge without restraint. The Watchers did not arrive as strangers. They spoke the language of heaven, yet walked among flesh. Their presence altered perception. Humanity, long accustomed to quiet guidance and distant observation, now stood before beings of power and radiance. Awe replaced discernment. Reverence shifted from the unseen Creator toward visible strength. The union that followed was not framed as affection but as possession. The ancient texts speak with careful sorrow. What was meant to remain distinct was joined without harmony. The Watchers took wives, not as equals, but as transgressors of design. This act did not elevate humanity, it reshaped it. From this union came offspring unlike any before them. The Nephilim were born into a world unprepared for their nature. Their bodies carried immense strength. Their minds carried fragments of heavenly awareness, yet they lacked the balance that comes from rightful origin. They were neither angels bound by obedience nor humans shaped by limitation. The earth strained beneath their presence. Resources were consumed rapidly. Order within families weakened. The natural balance between generations began to fracture. The Nephilim did not fit within the slow rhythms of human life. Their existence accelerated change where patience had once governed. Power gathered around them. Humanity, drawn by strength and fear, began to organize around these beings. Authority shifted quietly. What had been led by elders and memory now bent toward might and dominance. The Nephilim became figures of renown, not because of wisdom, but because of force. This shift did not occur overnight. It unfolded gradually, as all deep corruption does. At first, the Nephilim were seen as protectors and teachers. Their knowledge appeared beneficial. Their strength seemed useful. Yet power unrestrained does not remain benevolent. Without alignment to divine order, strength becomes consumption. The Watchers themselves did not escape consequence. Though they had gained what they desired, they did not find rest. Their appointed place was gone. They stood neither fully in heaven nor fully at peace on earth. The authority they once carried through obedience now rested on defiance. This authority could not endure. The distinction between realms continued to blur. Heavenly knowledge entered human systems without guidance. Practices unknown to humanity spread without wisdom. The balance between spirit and flesh weakened. The world became louder, heavier, and more restless. The Nephilim grew quickly, both in size and influence. Their presence altered the social fabric of the earth. Conflict increased, not always through open war, but through competition and fear. What could not be controlled began to dominate. What could not be reasoned with began to rule. This was not the result of creation gone wrong, but of creation misused. The design itself had not failed. It had been violated. The Watchers had stepped outside their role. Humanity had accepted what was never meant to be given. The offspring bore the weight of both errors. The tragedy of this descent lies not in spectacle but in distortion. Something beautiful had been fractured. Something orderly had been bent. The Nephilim did not choose their nature. They were born from transgression, carrying imbalance within their being. The ripples of this act moved outward. They touched land and lineage. They reshaped authority and thought. The earth continued to bear life, but the harmony that once defined it had been compromised. This chapter of descent marks the moment when separation was lost. Heaven and earth, once distinct and peaceful, now overlapped in confusion. The consequences would not remain contained. They would spread steadily and relentlessly across the world that once rested in balance. As the boundary dissolved, the effects moved beyond the visible. The unseen order that had sustained creation began to weaken. Heaven no longer stood wholly apart. Earth no longer rested fully beneath it. The separation that once preserved peace had been compromised, and with that loss came confusion of authority. The Watchers, having crossed without command, no longer functioned as guardians. Their role as witnesses had ended the moment they chose participation. What remained to them was strength without a rightful place. Their presence no longer preserved balance. It unsettled it. The harmony they once upheld through restraint now eroded through proximity. Humanity felt this change before it understood it. The natural sense of measure began to fade. Where patience once guided decisions, urgency entered. Where humility once shaped leadership, dominance emerged. The presence of beings born from transgression altered expectation. Power became visible, immediate, and admired. The Nephilim embodied this shift. Their stature and force redefined what it meant to be great. Renown was no longer tied to faithfulness or wisdom, but to strength and fear. Stories of their deeds spread across the land. Memory began to favor might over meaning. What endured was not what was true, but what was impressive. This change reached beyond human society into the earth itself. The balance of life was strained. Consumption increased. The slow rhythms of creation were interrupted by excess. What had once grown in harmony now struggled to sustain demand. The land bore witness to the imbalance introduced by the breach. The Watchers, though powerful, could not restore what they had undone. Their knowledge did not grant correction. Their strength did not grant authority. They had stepped outside the order that gave their existence meaning. In doing so, they forfeited the peace of obedience. What they gained in experience, they lost in alignment. The Nephilim, growing rapidly, inherited this instability. They were not anchored by memory of creation nor bound by command of heaven. Their awareness exceeded their capacity for restraint. This mismatch shaped their actions and their rule. Where wisdom requires humility, they possessed only force. The distinction between heaven and earth continued to erode. Practices once unknown entered human life. Knowledge without context spreads unchecked. The sacred became common. The unseen became manipulated. What had once been received with reverence was now used without understanding. This was the true cost of the descent, not merely the existence of giants, but the unraveling of order. The violation of boundaries had reshaped authority, memory, and desire. Creation itself began to bear weight it was never meant to carry. The tragedy of this age lies in its origin. What unfolded did not arise from necessity but from choice. The design of the world had been sufficient. Its order had been completed. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be crossed. Yet desire, once permitted to mature without restraint, reshaped everything it touched. Heaven did not respond immediately. Judgment did not fall at once. The Most High allowed the consequences of transgression to reveal themselves. The earth continued to turn. Generations continued to rise. Yet the foundation had shifted. What once stood firm now leaned toward collapse. This chapter closes with the world changed, though not yet destroyed. The boundary had been broken. The separation that preserved peace no longer held. The descent had set forces in motion that could not be undone by time or strength. From this moment, the age of quiet order had ended. What followed would arise from imbalance, spreading across the earth like a shadow at lengthening dusk. The descent had not shattered creation in a single moment, but it had altered its course beyond return. After the boundary was broken, the earth entered a new rhythm. It was no longer guided solely by memory and restraint. A different weight pressed upon it, heavy with force and urgency. The presence of the Nephilim altered the course of human life, not through sudden conquest, but through gradual dominance. Their strength exceeded that of ordinary men. Their endurance surpassed human limits. Their awareness carried traces of a realm never meant to shape the affairs of flesh. These qualities set them apart, and separation quickly became authority. Where difference exists without humility, hierarchy soon follows. Human communities began to gather around the Nephilim. At first, this gathering appeared practical. Strength promised protection. Knowledge promised advantage. In a world already unsettled by imbalance, the Nephilim seemed to offer stability. Yet stability rooted in power rather than order cannot endure. The Nephilim rose as rulers not by appointment but by presence. Their stature commanded attention. Their force demanded submission. Leadership shifted away from elders and memory toward might and immediacy. Those who stood closest to power survived. Those who resisted were displaced. Cities began to form around this new authority. Settlements expanded rapidly, drawn together by fear as much as by necessity. Stone replaced tents. Walls rose where open land had once been enough. Human culture reorganized itself around defense, dominance, and control. The Nephilim were called kings, though their rule did not rest on justice. They were named warriors, though their strength exceeded restraint. They became objects of reverence, not because they reflected the Creator, but because they inspired fear and awe. Reverence shifted from what was unseen to what stood visibly before the people. Moral boundaries began to blur. What had once been forbidden was now permitted if it served survival. What had once been questioned was now praised if it secured favor. Wisdom gave way to strategy. Conscience yielded to advantage. The memory of the Creator grew distant, replaced by loyalty to power. This transformation did not happen at once. It unfolded across generations. Children were born into a world where Nephilim authority was already established. They learned strength before reverence. They learned obedience to rulers before obedience to design. The old ways were not violently erased. They were simply neglected. The Nephilim Empire spread across the earth, not as a single kingdom but as a shared dominance. Their influence shaped trade, labor, and conflict. Human leaders aligned themselves with Nephilim power to preserve position. Those who refused were marginalized or silenced. Ancient memory later preserved these beings as heroes. Stories spoke of their feats, their victories, their grandeur. Songs remembered their names. Statues marked their reigns. Human tradition softened the cost of their rule and glorified its appearance. Scripture, however, speaks differently. It does not deny their greatness, but it records the consequence. It remembers the violence that filled the land. It recalls the loss of restraint. It names the corruption that followed unchecked power. What human memory adorned, the divine record weighed. The empire of the Nephilim was vast, yet it was unstable. It rested on imbalance rather than justice. Authority flowed from force rather than order. Such structures expand quickly, but they decay just as swiftly. Without humility, power accelerates its own end. Fear replaced wisdom as the guiding force of society. Survival replaced reverence. The question was no longer what was right, but what was effective. The earth itself bore this shift. The harmony that once sustained life quietly withdrew. This was the rise of dominion, not built by creation's design, but by its violation. What appeared glorious carried decay within it. What seemed strong lacked foundation. The Nephilim ruled the world, yet the world beneath them was already weakening. Unchecked power had reshaped humanity. The cost of that reshaping had begun to accumulate, unseen but certain, waiting for the moment when imbalance would no longer be sustained. As the dominion of the Nephilim expanded, the shape of human society changed with it. Life no longer unfolded according to memory and patience, but according to power and proximity. Those closest to Nephilim authority prospered. Those farthest from it endured hardship or erasure. Balance gave way to hierarchy rooted in fear. The Nephilim did not rule through shared law. Their governance was personal and immediate. Decisions were shaped by strength rather than wisdom. Judgment flowed from impulse rather than reflection. What pleased the powerful endured. What challenged them vanished. This form of rule created order only on the surface, while disorder spread beneath it. Human labor was reorganized to serve dominance. Fields were worked to supply growing cities. The stone was cut and raised into monuments of authority. Weapons were forged in greater numbers. The rhythms of life accelerated, driven by demand rather than season. Rest became rare. Excess became common. Violence increased, not always through open conflict, but through threat and control. Fear did not need to strike often to remain effective. Its presence alone reshaped behavior. Communities learned caution rather than trust. Speech narrowed. Silence grew safer than truth. The Nephilim themselves became symbols rather than individuals. Their presence was magnified through story and ritual. Human culture began to surround them with honorifics and ceremonies. This reverence did not arise from gratitude but from dependence. When survival depends on power, power becomes sacred. This shift altered how humanity understood meaning. What was once measured by alignment with divine order was now measured by success within the dominion. Strength was praised. Mercy was seen as weakness. Restraint appeared unnecessary. The virtues that once sustained harmony slowly lost their voice. Cities under Nephilim grew large and dense. They drew people from wide lands, offering protection in exchange for loyalty. Yet protection came at a cost. Individual identity dissolved into service. Families became units of labor. Children inherited obligation rather than freedom. Knowledge spreads quickly in this environment, but without guidance. Techniques for war, construction, and control multiplied. Yet wisdom did not increase with information. Understanding was replaced by utility. What worked was preserved. What required patience was abandoned. The Nephilim Empire appeared unified, yet it lacked cohesion. Each ruler held authority by force alone. Alliances shifted easily. Loyalty followed advantage. Peace endured only while dominance remained uncontested. Beneath the surface, instability grew. Human memory began to fracture. The stories of creation were spoken less often. The knowledge of boundaries faded. New generations accepted the dominion as natural. Few remembered a time before Nephilim rule. Fewer still imagined an alternative. Scripture records this age with brevity, yet its restraint carries weight. It does not list every ruler or city. It names the outcome. Violence filled the land. Corruption spread through all flesh. These words summarize not a moment but a condition sustained over time. The Nephilim were not portrayed as monsters but as rulers whose power exceeded restraint. Their dominion was impressive, yet incomplete. They could command obedience but not restore order. They could inspire fear but not preserve life. Their reign accelerated decay rather than preventing it. Unchecked power consumes what it governs. As dominion expanded, resources strained. Conflict increased. The earth bore the weight of imbalance. What had once sustained life easily now struggled to endure excess. The glory of the Nephilim Empire rested on appearance. Beneath it lay erosion. The systems built on force could not correct themselves. Without humility, there was no return to balance. Without reverence, there was no limit to expansion. This stage of the age revealed the cost of dominion without justice. What rose quickly did not stand securely. What appeared eternal carried its end within it. The world continued under Nephilim rule, yet the foundation beneath that rule had begun to give way. The growth of their empire marked not stability, but acceleration toward collapse. The earth endured, but it did so under strain, awaiting the moment when imbalance would no longer be tolerated. As the dominion of the Nephilim matured, its hidden weaknesses became clearer. What had once appeared unified began to fracture under its own weight. Power multiplied, but restraint diminished. Authority expanded, yet justice did not grow with it. The imbalance that marked their origin now shaped the end of their rule. The Nephilim governed through presence rather than covenant. Their authority did not bind hearts, only behavior. Obedience endured only while fear remained strong. When fear weakened, loyalty dissolved. This created a world always on the edge of unrest. Peace was temporary. Stability was conditional. Human leaders beneath Nephilim authority learned to imitate what they served. They ruled through dominance rather than care. They enforced order through threat rather than trust. Thus, corruption did not remain at the highest level. It spread downward, shaping every layer of society. Violence became common, not exceptional. The earth itself bore witness to this decay. The balance of land and water strained under demand. Fields were pressed beyond measure. Animals were consumed without restraint. The rhythms that once governed life were ignored. Creation responded not with abundance but with resistance. The Nephilim, for all their strength, could not reverse this erosion. Their power could conquer, but it could not heal. They could command labor, but they could not restore harmony. The world they ruled required wisdom they did not possess, and humility they could not practice. Ancient memory preserved their names, yet it softened their cost. Songs spoke of battles won and cities built. Stories praised their might and endurance. Human tradition often celebrates what dominates, forgetting what suffers. Scripture, however, remembers differently. The sacred record does not dwell on their monuments. It speaks of corruption. It does not praise their victories. It names the violence that filled the land. It measures their reign not by expansion, but by consequence. What mattered was not how high they rose, but how deeply order fell. Unchecked power accelerated decay because it silenced correction. There was no space for restraint, no authority above strength, no appeal beyond force. When error appeared, it multiplied. When injustice arose, it spread. The system could not correct itself because it did not acknowledge limits. This was the final shape of Nephilim dominion, vast in reach yet hollow at its core, impressive in scale yet unstable. In foundation, its glory masked its fragility, its strength concealed its end. Humanity lived beneath this rule long enough for corruption to feel normal. The memory of balance faded almost completely. What remained was survival shaped by fear. Reverence for the Creator had little place within such a structure. Trust had been replaced by control. The Nephilim Empire did not fall suddenly within this chapter. Its decline was already written into its design. Built on imbalance, it could not endure balance's return. Its authority had reshaped the world, but it had also exhausted it. This stage of history stands as a warning preserved in silence. Power without humility does not preserve life. Dominion without justice does not endure. What rises through force accelerates its own undoing. The earth continued beneath Nephilim rule, but it did so under increasing strain. The cost of their dominion had fully revealed itself. What once appeared glorious now stood exposed as destructive. The age had reached its fullness, and with fullness came judgment waiting beyond sight. When the Watchers crossed their boundary, they did not come empty-handed. They carried knowledge formed in a higher realm, shaped for order, restraint, and distance from flesh. What had once been held in trust was now released without measure. The earth received this knowledge, but it was not prepared to bear it. The teaching spread quietly at first. They did not arrive as commands, but as instructions. Humanity learned to shape weapons beyond necessity. Tools meant for protection became instruments of dominance. The balance between defense and aggression dissolved, and the shedding of blood grew more frequent. Other teachings followed. The movements of the stars were explained without reverence. Signs in the heavens were measured and interpreted for control rather than wonder. What had once declared the glory of the Creator was reduced to patterns for advantage. Time itself was divided and calculated, not for reflection, but for prediction. Sorcery entered human practice as knowledge separated from submission. Words were spoken to compel rather than to align. Elements were manipulated without regard for consequence. The unseen was approached not with humility, but with intent to command. Boundaries meant to protect were ignored. The manipulation of nature expanded alongside these teachings. Humanity learned to draw more from the earth than it could restore. Growth was forced. Cycles were interrupted. What had once responded gently to care now bore the strain of extraction. The land began to show signs of exhaustion. This knowledge was not evil by nature. It had existed within the design of heaven, but it had been held back for a reason. Knowledge without readiness does not enlighten. It is overwhelming. Wisdom requires restraint, timing, and moral alignment. Information alone carries no such guard. Human thought changed under this weight. The mind grew restless. Curiosity turned sharp. Desire for mastery replaced contentment. Competition increased as advantage became possible through hidden arts and advanced tools. Equality faded. Comparison grew constant. Violence did not arise only from weapons. It arose from the reshaping of thought. When knowledge promises control, patience weakens. When power appears attainable, restraint feels unnecessary. The internal life of humanity shifted from trust toward anxiety. Communities became restless. Silence was filled with planning. Nights were spent calculating rather than resting. The slow rhythm of earlier ages could no longer be sustained. Life accelerated without direction. Progress moved faster than understanding. The Watchers did not guide this knowledge with wisdom. Having abandoned their appointed role, they no longer taught restraint. They revealed without guarding. They instructed without accountability. What was given freely spread without correction. This exposure altered relationships. Trust diminished as secrets multiplied. The unseen became a tool rather than a mystery. What could be manipulated lost its sacred weight. Reverence thinned. The earth itself is described as suffering beneath this change, not as a symbol but as a response. Creation was not passive. The imbalance introduced through forbidden knowledge strained the harmony of land, water, and life. The ground bore the consequences of human excess. This corruption did not remain isolated. It spread through systems of thought and practice. Violence became normal. Restlessness became constant. Competition replaced cooperation. The inner life of humanity mirrored the disorder of the unseen realm. The difference between wisdom and information became clear. Wisdom preserves life through alignment. Information seeks effect without regard for cost. Humanity had gained much, yet understood little. What was lost could not be measured easily. This chapter of history reveals that corruption rarely begins with intent to destroy. It begins with exposure without restraint. What had once been hidden for protection was now exposed without measure. The result was not enlightenment, but weight. The world continued under this burden. Knowledge spreads faster than conscience. Power advanced beyond wisdom. The earth endured, yet it did so under strain. What had been released could not be gathered again. This was the unleashing of forbidden knowledge. Its reach extended beyond tools and practices. It reshaped thought, desire, and environment alike. The consequences had begun to deepen, moving steadily through every layer of the world. As forbidden knowledge spread, it did not remain confined to a few skilled hands. What was once rare became common. What was once guarded became expected. Instruction passed quickly from city to city, from teacher to apprentice, from ruler to servant. Knowledge multiplied, yet wisdom did not grow with it. Weapons were refined and multiplied. Blades were shaped for efficiency rather than necessity. Strength was enhanced through design, not discipline. Conflict no longer required personal grievance. Power itself became reason enough. Violence increased not only in scale but in frequency. Bloodshed ceased to shock. It became routine. Astrological knowledge altered how time was understood. Days and seasons were no longer received as gifts, but analyzed as variables. The heavens were no longer signs of divine order, but instruments for calculation. Fate was no longer entrusted to the Creator, but pursued through pattern and prediction. Anxiety followed this shift, for what can be measured invites fear of loss. Sorcery deepened this unrest. The unseen realm was approached without reverence. Names were spoken to compel rather than to honor. Forces once distant were summoned too closely. Humanity reached beyond its measure, seeking to command what it could not govern. The unseen, disturbed by misuse, did not respond with peace. Nature suffered under these practices. The balance between growth and rest was broken. Land was pressed beyond its season. Waters were diverted without care. The earth, once responsive, grew strained. Harvests became uneven. The quiet abundance of earlier days faded. This strain reached into the inner life of humanity. Restlessness became widespread. Minds no longer found stillness. Thought moved constantly toward control, prediction, and advantage. Contentment disappeared, replaced by dissatisfaction. Comparison ruled daily life. Knowledge promised mastery, yet delivered unease. Competition intensified. Those with greater access to forbidden teachings gained advantage over others. Hierarchies sharpened. Inequality widened. The strong prospered. The weak endured. Compassion weakened under pressure. Survival replaced stewardship as the guiding principle. The watchers offered no correction. Having revealed what was hidden, they did not remain to guard its use. Their own disorder echoed through their instruction. Knowledge without accountability continued to spread. Boundaries eroded further. Human leadership adapted to this environment. Rulers employed forbidden knowledge to secure dominance. Power was maintained through fear rather than trust. Justice became secondary to control. Law served authority, not order. Communities grew tense, governed by suspicion. The sacred lost its distinction. When everything can be accessed, nothing remains revered. Mystery dissolved into technique. Wonder gave way to manipulation. The unseen was treated as a resource rather than reality. Reverence, once central to life, became rare. Scripture remembers this age not for its innovation, but for its corruption. It records a world where thought itself was affected. The inclination of the heart grew restless and violent. This was not the fault of knowledge alone, but of knowledge separated from moral alignment. The earth's suffering mirrored this internal disorder. Creation responded to misuse with resistance. The land no longer yielded freely. Balance required effort. The harmony between humanity and the environment weakened. What had once sustained life now struggled to endure excess. This corruption was systemic. It touched thought, action, and environment alike. No area remained untouched. Knowledge had reshaped the world, but without wisdom, it reshaped it toward decay. Yet the spread continued. Forbidden knowledge promised solutions to problems it had created. Each attempt to regain control deepened dependence. Humanity moved further from stillness, further from trust, further from alignment. The cost of this knowledge was now evident, though not yet fully realized. The world carried its weight quietly, bearing strain without immediate collapse, but the foundation had been compromised. What had been unleashed could not be restrained by human effort alone. This stage of history reveals that information without order does not liberate. It destabilizes. Wisdom alone preserves balance. Without it, even great knowledge becomes a burden. The earth endured beneath this growing weight. Humanity continued, restless and driven. The consequences of forbidden knowledge deepened, preparing the way for judgment shaped not by anger, but by necessity. As the age progressed, the effects of forbidden knowledge became inseparable from daily life. What had entered quietly now shaped every structure of thought and action. Humanity no longer remembered a world without these teachings. They had become woven into custom, labor, and expectation. The restless mind became the mark of the age. Thought no longer settled into stillness. Reflection was replaced by calculation. Silence felt empty rather than sacred. The inner life of humanity grew crowded with intent, strategy, and desire. Knowledge promised control, yet delivered unrest. Violence followed naturally from this condition. It did not always appear as open war. It emerged in rivalry, exploitation, and disregard for life. When power becomes attainable through technique, restraint appears unnecessary. The value of life diminished as efficiency increased. What could be achieved mattered more than what should be preserved. Competition reshaped relationships. Communities fractured along lines of access and advantage. Trust eroded as secrecy grew. Knowledge became currency. Those who possessed it guarded it closely. Those without it were left vulnerable. Unity gave way to suspicion. The earth continued to suffer under this imbalance. Its response was gradual, not sudden. The land grew weary. Waters shifted. Cycles lost their consistency. Creation, once aligned with humanity, now reflected its disorder. The suffering of the earth was not punishment, but consequence. The Watchers, having released this knowledge, could not reclaim it. Their authority to instruct had dissolved when obedience was abandoned. What they had unveiled spread beyond their reach. They remained present, yet ineffective. Their influence now deepened disorder rather than correcting it. This revealed the true nature of forbidden knowledge. It did not simply add to human ability, it reshaped desire itself. Humanity no longer sought alignment with divine order. It sought mastery. Control replaced trust. Action replaced patience. The soul grew restless beneath the weight of constant intention. Scripture's brief words carry immense weight here. It speaks of corruption spreading through all flesh. This was not limited to action, but extended into thought. The inner orientation of humanity had shifted. The inclination of the heart bent toward violence and unrest. The sacred record does not describe a single cause but a condition. Knowledge divorced from moral order had reshaped the world's foundation. The corruption was no longer isolated. It was complete. Thought, practice, and environment reflected the same imbalance. Yet this age did not end immediately. The world continued beneath the strain. Life persisted. Generations rose. The patience of heaven allowed consequence to unfold fully. Judgment was not rushed. It waited until the weight became undeniable. The suffering of the earth reached a quiet fullness. What had once sustained life easily now labored to endure excess. Creation itself bore witness to the need for correction. The harmony of the beginning could not be restored through human effort alone. This chapter reveals that forbidden knowledge carries a cost beyond immediate harm. It reshapes desire, accelerates decay, and burdens creation itself. What was meant to remain hidden had been exposed too soon, without wisdom, without restraint. The age stood heavy beneath this burden. Knowledge had multiplied, peace had diminished. The earth endured, but it did so under strain. What had been unleashed could not be gathered again by human hands. Thus, the corruption of this world reached its depth not through ignorance, but through knowledge misused. The consequences were complete, touching every layer of existence. What followed would arise not from anger, but from necessity, as balance sought restoration. The sacred record speaks with few words, yet those words carry great weight. It says that the earth was filled with violence. This was not a momentary condition, nor a sudden outbreak. It was the settled state of the world. Violence had become the atmosphere in which life unfolded. Life was no longer held as sacred. It was measured by usefulness and strength. The weak were not protected. The vulnerable were not preserved. Value shifted from being to function. What could be taken was taken. What could be consumed was consumed. The Nephilim led this change by example rather than decree. Their great size and power required constant provision. The earth was pressed to satisfy them. Herds were consumed without restraint. The fields were exhausted. What once sustained many was devoured to satisfy a few. Humanity followed this pattern. The imitation of power replaced the practice of restraint. Those beneath Nephilim authority learned domin. Ation as survival. Violence was no longer shocking. It became instructional. Children grew within its presence and learned it as normal. Domination reshaped every relationship. Strength determined outcome. Mercy was seen as a liability. Compassion weakened my position. In such a world, fear became wisdom and caution became virtue. The trust had no shelter. This violence did not always announce itself through war. It lived in daily decisions, in exploitation without remorse, in silence where truth should have spoken, in indifference towards suffering. The shedding of blood was only the surface. Beneath it lay a deeper harm. Innocence did not vanish through force alone. It disappeared quietly. It faded through repetition, through normalization, through the steady erosion of conscience. When violence is constant, sensitivity dulls. When domination is rewarded, humility fades. The earth bore witness to this change. Creation itself groaned beneath the weight. The balance between giving and receiving collapsed. What was taken was not restored. The land grew weary. The waters carried excess. The harmony of earlier ages could no longer be felt. Yet judgment did not come at once. Heaven did not strike immediately. The patience of the Most High endured longer than the earth could bear. This patience was not indifference. It was restraint shaped by mercy. Time passed. Generations rose within corruption. Each generation inherited a world already bent. Still, space remained for repentance. Still, the Creator endured the sorrow of watching His design distorted. Judgment was delayed not because violence was unseen, but because mercy was deep. The sorrow of heaven preceded the decision of judgment. The sacred text speaks of grief, not anger. It reveals a Creator who observed every act and weighed every thought. The corruption was not partial. It had become complete. Collective corruption carries moral weight beyond individual acts. Violence had filled the earth because it had filled the heart of humanity. Thought itself had turned toward harm. The inclination of desire bent away from life. This was the turning point of the age, not because violence appeared, but because it became total. No corner of the world remained untouched. No structure stood unshaped by domination. The world had reached a fullness of corruption. Still, heaven waited. The patience endured. Judgment did not rush forward. It approached slowly, as all final decisions do. The sorrow of what had been lost lingered longer than the urgency to end it. This chapter opens upon a world that could no longer sustain itself. Violence had become its language, domination its logic. Innocence had no refuge. Yet above it all, patience still held, bearing sorrow, waiting until endurance could no longer preserve life. As violence spread, it reshaped not only action but thought. The inner life of humanity no longer turned toward peace. Desire leaned toward control. Intention bent toward advantage. What was imagined soon became practiced. What was practiced became a habit. The Nephilim continued to consume without restraint. Their needs exceeded measure. Their presence demanded constant supply. The earth was stripped to sustain them, and humanity learned to do the same. What power desired, power received. Limitation was ignored. Excess became ordinary. Human communities reflected this pattern. Those with strength took from those without it. The vulnerable learned silence. Resistance carried cost. Survival required compliance. Violence no longer needed justification. It was understood as a necessity. Conflict multiplied, not always through open battle but through steady pressure, through displacement, through hoarding, through the quiet removal of those who stood in the way. Life lost its inherent worth and gained conditional value. The sacred record does not dwell on spectacle here. It does not recount every act of cruelty. Instead, it describes a condition. Violence had filled the earth. This fullness speaks of saturation. There was no space left untouched by harm. This condition affected every level of existence. Families fractured under strain. Communities hardened. Leaders ruled through fear. The idea of shared good disappeared. Each sought advantage within a broken system. Trust vanished because survival no longer allowed it. The loss of innocence continued without announcement. No moment marked its departure. It faded through repetition. Each act of violence made the next easier. Each act of domination reduced resistance. Conscience dulled. The memory of peace became faint. The earth reflected this decay. The balance between life and death shifted. Creation was no longer tended but exploited. The land bore scars of overuse. Waters carried the residue of excess. The world itself mirrored the disorder of its inhabitants. Still, judgment did not arrive. The patience of heaven remained. This patience was not ignorance. Every act was seen. Every thought was weighed, delay was purposeful. It allowed the fullness of corruption to reveal itself beyond question. Heaven's sorrow deepened during this time. The sacred text speaks of grief rather than rage. This grief flowed from the loss of what had been good. The world had not merely changed, it had been undone. The endurance of heaven revealed the weight of mercy. Judgment was not desired. Restoration was always preferred. Yet restoration requires willingness. As violence normalized, that willingness disappeared. The moral weight of collective corruption became undeniable. This was no longer the failure of individuals alone. It was the orientation of the world. Systems reinforced harm. Power rewarded cruelty. Silence protected injustice. Time continued. The earth endured longer than seemed possible. This endurance itself became testimony. It showed that judgment was not impulsive. It came only when preservation was no longer possible. The patience of heaven allowed every excuse to fall away. The corruption could not be blamed on ignorance. Knowledge had been abundant. Choice had been present. The path had been clear. Violence filled the earth because humanity had chosen it repeatedly. Domination replaced stewardship. Consumption replaced care. Fear replaced reverence. Innocence had vanished, not through force alone, but through acceptance. This stage of the age stands as the clearest evidence of necessity. When violence becomes total, restraint alone cannot restore balance. Mercy, though deep, must eventually give way to correction. The sorrow of heaven reached its fullness alongside the corruption of the earth. Both stood complete. The moment of decision approached, not driven by anger, but by the need to preserve what little could still be saved. This chapter continues beneath that heavy stillness. Violence had filled the earth. Patience had endured. The weight of corruption now pressed against the limits of mercy. The world entered a season where violence no longer surprised. It had become the expected shape of life. What once would have provoked sorrow now passed without notice. Sensitivity had been worn away through constant exposure. The earth lived beneath a steady weight of harm. Domination defines relationships. Strength ruled without apology. Those who possessed power exercised it freely. Those without it learned to endure quietly. Survival depended on adaptation to cruelty rather than resistance against it. The Nephilim stood at the height of this condition. Their consumption reached its peak. The earth struggled to meet their demand. What could be taken was taken until little remained. Humanity mirrored this excess, having learned that restraint no longer preserved life. This fullness of violence was not chaotic, it was structured. Systems reinforced it. The authorities protected it. Culture normalized it. Songs celebrated conquest. Stories honored domination. Memory itself had been reshaped. Innocence had not been destroyed violently. It had been erased through repetition. Each act of harm made the next easier. Each generation inherited a world already hardened. The concept of sacred life faded almost entirely. The patience of heaven reached its limit not because violence appeared, but because it endured. Time had been given. Space for repentance had existed. Yet the inclination of the heart remained unchanged. Violence had become the settled orientation of the world. The sorrow of heaven preceded judgment. The sacred record speaks of grief. This grief reveals a creator who valued what had been lost. Judgment arose not from rage, but from necessity. The earth could no longer sustain corruption without complete collapse. The moral weight of collective corruption became clear. Responsibility extended beyond individuals to systems and cultures. The world itself bore accountability. Violence had filled the earth because it had been accepted everywhere. This acceptance closed the door to restoration through human effort. No reform could reverse a condition so complete. Correction required intervention beyond the world's capacity. Yet even here, restraint remained. Judgment did not erupt in chaos. It approached with deliberation. The decision formed slowly, shaped by endurance rather than impulse. The earth rested under a heavy stillness. Life continued, but it did so under judgment already determined. The age had reached its conclusion not through a single act, but through accumulation. This chapter closes upon a world fully revealed. Violence had filled the earth. Patience had endured. Sorrow had deepened. The conditions for judgment were complete. What followed would not arise from sudden anger, but from the necessity to restore order. The earth had borne as much as it could. The time of endurance had ended. Amid a world bent beneath corruption, not all paths were lost. Even as violence filled the earth and order dissolved, there remained a quiet thread of faithfulness. It did not rise in protest, nor did it gat her power. It endured in silence, carried by a few whose lives moved against the current of their age. Among these was Enoch. His name appears briefly in the sacred record, yet his life carries great weight. He did not rule cities or command armies. He walked. His path was marked not by conquest but by alignment. While the world around him accelerated toward disorder, Enoch's life moved steadily in obedience. The ancient writings speak of his walk with God as continuous and unbroken. This walk was not an escape from the world, but a presence within it without corruption. Enoch lived among the people of his time, yet he did not mirror their ways. His faithfulness was not dramatic, it was consistent. Apocryphal tradition expands this witness. In the Book of Enoch, his walk becomes a journey of revelation. He is shown the structure of the heavens, the courses of the stars, and the judgment prepared for corruption. These visions are not given to satisfy curiosity, but to bear witness. Enoch sees the consequence of disorder long before it arrives upon the earth. His visions speak of balance restored and rebellion answered. They reveal a moral order that cannot be overturned by force. Through him, the unseen realm testifies that corruption, though widespread, is not final. Judgment stands, but it is shaped by justice rather than rage. Enoch's life stands as quiet resistance. He does not confront the Nephilim. He does not challenge their dominion. His resistance lies in refusal to participate. In a world where domination defined success, he chose obedience. In an age where knowledge fueled control, he remained aligned with restraint. The sacred record says that Enoch did not see death. His departure is described without detail, as though the manner mattered less than the meaning. His removal from the earth stands as testimony that faithfulness was still seen. The world had not become invisible to heaven. After Enoch, another figure emerges within this darkness. Noah lived generations later, when corruption had deepened and violence had become complete. He did not inherit a peaceful world. He was born into decay, yet his life followed a different measure. Noah is not presented as a man of public speech. He does not rally others. He does not reform society. He is described simply as righteous and blameless in his generation. These words do not speak of perfection, but of alignment. His righteousness was expressed through obedience rather than action. He listened. He waited. He followed instructions without demanding an explanation. In a world driven by impulse, Noah lived by restraint. His faithfulness was quiet, shaped by trust rather than urgency. Together, Enoch and Noah form a witness within corruption. They do not stop the spread of violence. They do not reverse decay. Their role is preservation, not reform. Through their lives, a path forward is kept open, even as the old world approaches its end. Their presence reveals that righteousness did not disappear. It endured without recognition. It survived without reward. It did not depend on numbers or influence. It rested on obedience. This chapter opens upon that quiet endurance. In the darkest age, faithfulness remained, not loud, not powerful, yet sufficient to preserve the future when the present could no longer stand. The life of Enoch stood apart not because of withdrawal, but because of closeness. His walk with God did not remove him from the world. It ordered his place within it. While corruption multiplied, Enoch remained oriented toward what was unseen. His attention was fixed beyond the violence that surrounded him. The apocryphal writings describe Enoch as one who listened. He received visions not to elevate himself, but to bear witness. What he was shown revealed the structure of judgment and the certainty of restoration. These visions were not threats spoken aloud. They were truths held quietly. Enoch saw the fate of the watchers who had abandoned their place. He saw confinement prepared for rebellion and restoration prepared for creation. His knowledge did not lead him to action against the corrupt world. It led him to deeper alignment. He became a living testimony that order still existed beyond the chaos. His life carried sorrow, yet it was not despair. He understood what was coming, yet he did not rush it. His obedience was steady. He remained faithful without attempting to intervene in matters beyond his calling. In this restraint, he mirrored the obedience that had once defined the heavens. Enoch's departure from the earth is recorded without struggle. He was taken, not removed by force. This transition stands as a sign that faithfulness was not forgotten. Even as the world declined, heaven remained attentive. After Enoch, the corruption deepened. Generations passed. Violence intensified. Yet righteousness did not vanish with him. It appeared again, quieter still, in the life of Noah. Noah's righteousness is described in simple terms. He was just. He was blameless among his generation. These words describe orientation, not achievement. Noah lived within the world as it was, yet he did not absorb its ways. His obedience was expressed through silence. He did not speak against corruption. He did not announce judgment. He lived attentively, responding to instruction when it came. His life was marked by patience in a world driven by urgency. Noah's faithfulness was not shaped by visions shared publicly. It was shaped by trust practiced privately. He accepted instruction without debate. He prepared without complaint. His obedience did not depend on understanding outcomes. In a time when knowledge was used to dominate, Noah received instruction to preserve. His work did not aim to correct the world, but to carry life beyond it. This distinction reveals his role. He was not sent to reform, but to continue. The contrast between Noah and the world around him is deliberate. While violence filled the earth, he labored quietly. While domination ruled, he practiced restraint. While corruption spread, he remained aligned. His righteousness did not isolate him. It distinguished him. He lived within his generation, yet he did not belong to its orientation. His life bore witness without confrontation. Together, Enoch and Noah reveal that righteousness did not depend on circumstance. It endured within corruption without being shaped by it. Their lives stand as quiet resistance, not through force, but through faithfulness. This resistance did not halt judgment. It did not delay the necessary end of the age. Its purpose was preservation. Through their obedience, continuity was maintained when the world itself could no longer continue. Their witness reveals a deeper truth. Even when corruption becomes complete, righteousness does not disappear. It narrows. It becomes quiet. Yet it remains sufficient to carry forward what must endure. The witness carried by Enoch and Noah did not alter the course of the age, yet it preserved meaning within it. Their faithfulness did not rescue the world from judgment, but it ensured that judgment would not erase all that was good. Through them, Continuity was guarded when collapse became unavoidable. Righteousness in this age did not seek recognition. It did not gather followers. It did not establish systems. It endured quietly, often unnoticed. This quiet endurance revealed its strength. It was not sustained by approval but by alignment. The lives of Enoch and Noah stand as evidence that obedience does not require favorable conditions. Their faithfulness arose within decay, not apart from it. They did not wait for reform to act rightly. They did not require peace to remain aligned. Their righteousness was inward before it was visible. This inward orientation preserved clarity. While the world around them lost distinction between right and wrong, their path remained clear. They were not untouched by sorrow. They lived with awareness of loss, yet sorrow did not turn them bitter. It deepened their trust. Enoch's visions revealed that judgment and restoration were held together. He saw that the end of corruption did not mean the end of purpose. This knowledge did not lead him to urgency or fear. It grounded him in patience. His life reflected assurance rather than alarm. Noah's obedience carried this assurance forward. He did not know the full shape of what would come. He knew only what he was instructed to do. This limited knowledge did not weaken his faithfulness. It purified it. His trust rested not in explanation but in alignment. Their lives reveal that righteousness does not always prevent loss. Often it prepares the way through it. The old world could not stand, yet something had to be carried beyond it. Through Enoch, testimony was preserved. Through Noah, life was preserved. This preservation did not come through power. It came through restraint. It did not rely on force. It rested on obedience. In an age defined by domination, this quiet faithfulness stood apart. The presence of the righteous also reveals the justice of what followed. Judgment did not fall upon a world without witness. Faithfulness had existed. Choice had remained. The corruption that filled the earth was not unavoidable. It had been chosen repeatedly. Thus, the moral weight of the age is complete. Violence had filled the earth, yet righteousness had endured. The contrast stood clear. The path of obedience had not vanished. It had been narrow, but it had remained open. The witness of the righteous stands not as accusation, but as testimony. It shows what was possible, even in the darkest age. It affirms that alignment with divine order did not depend on the environment, but on will. As the age approached its end, this witness became more precious. It held the memory of what the world had once been. It carried the promise of what could still be restored. It bridged the silence between judgment and renewal. The world could no longer stand, but the purpose of sea. Creation was not abandoned. Through quiet obedience, a path forward was preserved. The righteous did not save the age, but they ensured that its end was not final. This chapter closes upon that quiet truth. Even as corruption reached its fullness, righteousness endured, not loudly, not widely, yet sufficiently. The turning of the age did not begin upon the earth. It began above it. While violence filled the world below, the heavens remained attentive. Nothing had escaped notice. No act of corruption had gone unseen. The sacred record speaks not of surprise, but of sorrow. This sorrow was not weakness. It was the weight of regard. Creation had been formed with care, set within order, and entrusted to obedience. What now lay broken had once been whole. The grief of heaven arose from the loss of what had been good. Scripture speaks of the heart of the Most High being moved. This movement was not an impulse. It was a reflection. Judgment did not rise suddenly. It formed slowly, shaped by endurance. Time had been given. Space for return had remained open. The delay itself testified to restraint. The corruption of the earth had become complete. Violence filled every place. Thought itself had bent toward harm. The order established at creation no longer functioned. What was meant to preserve life now sustained destruction. The world could not correct itself. The decision of heaven was not framed as destruction alone. It was framed as cleansing. The earth required release from what weighed upon it. The flood was not an act of chaos, but of restoration through removal. What had corrupted the world would be washed away so that order could return. Boundaries that had been violated would be restored. The separation between heaven and earth, once broken, would be reestablished. The mingling that produced imbalance would not continue. Creation would be returned to its proper measure. The watchers who abandoned their appointed place were condemned. Their judgment was not immediate erasure but confinement. They were removed from influence. Their authority ended. Their rebellion was answered with restraint rather than spectacle. Their offspring, born from violation of order, were marked for erasure. This was not punishment of beings for existing, but correction of imbalance. What could not be reconciled with creation's design could not remain within it. The Nephilim would not carry their dominion into the renewed world. Divine justice here is paired with restraint. The judgment was precise. It addressed cause, not appearance. It removed what corrupted rather than destroying what could be preserved. Life was not rejected. Disorder was. The seriousness of moral order becomes clear in this decision. Creation is not sustained by power alone, but by alignment. When alignment collapses completely, correction becomes necessary. Mercy had endured. Now justice moved to restore balance. The decision of heaven was final, yet it was not rushed. It arose from sorrow, not anger. It sought restoration, not annihilation. What would follow would be severe, yet measured. This chapter opens upon that solemn resolve. The world had reached its fullness of corruption. Heaven answered not with chaos, but with order reasserted. The cleansing of the earth would begin, not as an end, but as a necessary beginning. The resolve of heaven unfolded with clarity. What had been allowed to endure for the sake of mercy could no longer remain for the sake of life. The order established at the beginning required restoration. The decision was not made in haste. It arose from a full accounting of what the world had become. The flood was appointed not as destruction without purpose, but as cleansing with intention. Water, which once sustained life, would now be used to release the earth from corruption. This return to the deep echoed the first shaping of creation, when waters were gathered and restrained. Now they would be lost for a time, to wash away what could not be healed. This act did not deny the value of creation. It affirmed it. The earth was not abandoned. It was relieved of a burden it could no longer bear. Corruption had spread into every system. Thought, action, and environment had been altered beyond correction. Cleansing became necessary so that order could be restored. The boundaries broken by rebellion were addressed directly. The mingling of realms would not continue. Heaven would be set apart once more. Earth would return to its proper place beneath it. The design that preserved peace would be reestablished. The watchers who had descended were judged according to their transgression. Their authority was removed. Their freedom of movement ended. Apocryphal texts speak of their confinement, held apart from the world they had corrupted. This judgment was severe, yet restrained. They were not destroyed, but bound. Their influence was ended. This response reveals the nature of divine justice. It is not driven by excess. It is measured. It removes source of corruption rather than multiplying harm. The watchers were judged not for strength, but for abandonment of obedience. Their punishment matched their violation. Their offspring, the Nephilim, stood as living imbalance. They did not belong fully to any realm. Their existence testified to a boundary crossed. Because creation could not carry this imbalance forward, Their end was determined. They would not pass into the renewed world. This erasure was not cruelty. It was a correction. What could not be aligned with creation's order could not remain within it. Justice here does not act against life itself, but against disorder that consumes life. The seriousness of moral order is revealed at this moment. Creation is not neutral. It is shaped by alignment. When alignment collapses, consequence follows. The flood would not discriminate by power or status. It would address the condition of the world as a whole. Still, restraint remained. Judgment was not total annihilation. Preservation was prepared alongside cleansing. Life would continue. Memory would endure. The design of creation would not be erased. It would be restored. This balance between justice and mercy defines the decision of heaven. What was corrupt would be removed. What was faithful would be preserved. The flood was not an expression of loss of control, but of control reasserted. The sorrow that preceded this decision remained present. Judgment did not erase grief. It followed it. The Most High did not act without regard for what had been lost. The world mattered. Its distortion grieved heaven deeply. Thus, the decision moved forward with solemn precision. The earth would be cleansed. Boundaries would be restored. Authority would be reestablished. The age that could no longer stand would pass away. This chapter continues beneath that measured resolve. Judgment had been determined, not to end creation but to preserve it, not to destroy life but to restore order. As the decision of heaven settled into certainty, the movement toward judgment remained calm and deliberate. There was no haste in its approach. The resolve had been formed through endurance, weighed against mercy and shaped by sorrow. What followed would unfold in order, not chaos. The seriousness of moral order stands clearly in this moment. Creation was not left to drift without consequence. The Most High had entrusted the world to structure, not force. Yet when structure was abandoned completely, correction became unavoidable. Justice did not contradict mercy. It completed it. The flood, though vast, was not indiscriminate. It addressed the condition of the earth, not the idea of life itself. What had been corrupted beyond restoration would be removed. What remained aligned would be carried forward. This distinction reveals intent rather than excess. Boundaries, once broken, would be restored. Heaven would no longer intermingle with earth. The unseen realm would be set apart once more. Humanity would return to its proper measure. Creation would again function within its designed limits. The condemnation of the Watchers marked the end of unlawful authority. Their influence over the world ceased. Their judgment ensured that the rebellion would not continue beyond this age. What they had introduced would not define the future. The removal of the Nephilim confirmed the seriousness of imbalance. Their erasure was not an act of vengeance, but of necessity. A renewed world could not be built upon a violation of its foundation. Order required correction at its source. This decision reveals that divine justice does not seek domination. It seeks alignment. It restores what has been bent and removes what cannot be reconciled. The flood stands as an act of cleansing, severe yet purposeful, sorrowful yet necessary. The patience that delayed judgment now gave way to resolve. Mercy had been extended fully. Endurance had reached its limit. The time for correction had arrived, not because heaven grew impatient, but because the earth could no longer endure corruption. This chapter closes beneath that solemn balance. Justice and restraint moved together. The decision of heaven was complete. What followed would not arise from anger, but from the need to restore order to a world that had lost it. When the appointed time arrived, the change came without haste. The heavens did not rage. The earth did not cry out. The waters moved according to command, steady and deliberate as they had at the beginning. What had once been restrained was released, not in chaos but in order. Rain fell upon the land with persistence rather than force. Springs beneath the ground opened quietly. The separation between the waters above and the waters below dissolved, returning the world to an earlier state. The earth did not resist. It received what had been determined. Cities built upon domination were the first to fade. Stone walls offered no shelter. Towers lost their purpose. The works of the Nephilim Empire, once vast and imposing, yielded to the rising deep. Their strength held no meaning beneath the waters. Their authority could not command the flood. The Nephilim themselves vanished from the surface of the world. Their dominion ended without ceremony. What had risen through imbalance dissolved back into silence. Their memory, once preserved in fear and song, was sealed beneath the waters. The age that had carried them passed away. The ark stood apart from this dissolution. It did not flee the flood. It remained within it. Its purpose was not escape but preservation. It carried life forward, not as triumph but as trust fulfilled. It moved upon the waters as creation once had, borne by command rather than control. Within the ark, life was held quietly. There was no conquest within its walls, no assertion of strength, only obedience and waiting. The ark did not resist the waters, it rested upon them. As the flood continued, the noise of the world diminished. The sounds of labor ceased. The echoes of violence faded. What had filled the earth gave way to stillness. Judgment did not announce itself with terror. It completed its work through removal. Silence spread across the land as the waters covered every place. This silence was not emptiness. It was completed. The age that could not stand had ended. The earth rested beneath the deep, released from the weight it had borne. This silence invites reflection rather than fear. It speaks of impermanence. What rose without alignment could not endure. What was built on rebellion dissolved when restraint returned. The flood did not destroy meaning. It revealed it. The cost of rebellion became clear not through suffering alone, but through absence. What had dominated was gone. What had been consumed was removed. The world rested beneath judgment. The waters continued their course and the earth remained quiet. This was not the silence of despair, but of rest after upheaval. The work of correction had been done. The land waited. As the waters rose, the marks of the former age disappeared without resistance. Roads vanished first, then fields, then the outlines of cities. What had once been shaped by ambition returned to formlessness. The flood did not distinguish between monument and dwelling. All were received equally into the deep. The empire of the Nephilim left no remnant upon the surface. Its reach had been vast, yet its foundation was shallow. Beneath the waters, strength lost meaning. Size offered no advantage. Authority carried no weight. The world that had been organized around domination dissolved quietly. The flood did not linger upon individual moments. It erased conditions. It removed systems. It washed away the patterns of thought that had governed the age. Violence, which had filled the earth, found no place within the deep. Fear had no echo there. Control could not function where nothing resisted. The ark remained, moving slowly upon the surface. It did not steer its course. It did not seek land. It rested where the waters carried it. This stillness within motion reflected its purpose. Preservation did not require struggle. It required trust. Inside, life continued without urgency. Breath rose and fell. Time passed without measure. The ark became a memory of the beginning, when the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. Once again, life waited while the world rested beneath the deep. The silence deepened as the flood reached its fullness. No voices rose from the land. No labor echoed across the plains. The constant noise of the former world was gone. What remained was the sound of water and the absence of striving. This silence was not imposed, it followed naturally. When violence ceased, noise ceased with it. When domination ended, tension ended as well. The earth rested from the burden of corruption. What had been restless was still made. The waters covered the highest places, sealing memories beneath them. The stories of conquest ended without retelling. The names of rulers were no longer spoken. What had sought permanence through power found none. The flood revealed how brief such claims had always been. This finality carried weight, yet it did not press heavily. It invited reflection rather than fear. The absence of the old world allowed space for understanding. Nothing endured simply because it was strong. Nothing remained simply because it had ruled. Impermanence became visible in the stillness. The age that had seemed unshakable passed without resistance. Its end did not require explanation. It stood as consequence fulfilled. The flood continued not endlessly but sufficiently. It did not exceed its purpose. It did not consume what had been preserved. Judgment remained contained within intention. When correction was complete, the waters held their place. Above the deep, the sky remained unchanged. The heavens did not collapse. The order above endured while the earth below rested. This separation, once broken, now stood restored even in silence. The arche floated between these realms, neither ruling nor resisting. It bore witness to obedience that required no voice. It carried forward what could endure beyond judgment. The silence that followed upheaval was not empty. It was full of meaning. It spoke of limits. It spoke of restoration through removal. It spoke of life preserved not through power but through alignment. As the waters held the earth in stillness, time itself seemed to slow. The world waited without urgency. What had been rushed was gone. What remained rested. This was quiet after the correction, the silence after excess, the pause between what had ended and what would one day begin. The silence that followed the flood was deep and unbroken. It did not hurry toward renewal. It did not announce what would come next. It remained, allowing the weight of what had passed to settle fully into the earth. This stillness was part of the judgment itself. Beneath the waters, the memory of the former world rested beyond reach. The structures that had shaped human ambition were gone. The systems that rewarded domination no longer functioned. What had been built upon imbalance had returned to the deep from which the earth was first drawn. The Nephilim Empire existed no longer as a presence or power. Its cities were erased. Its rule ended without succession. The age that had carried it closed without ceremony. Silence sealed its memory more fully than destruction ever could. This finality invites reflection rather than sorrow. What had filled the earth with violence could not endure. What had risen without alignment dissolved when order returned. The flood revealed that permanence belongs only to what rests within design. The ark continued upon the waters unchanged in purpose. It did not rush toward land. It waited. Preservation required patience. Life was not reclaimed through force but through trust maintained over time. Within this waiting, the world held its breath. The earth rested beneath the waters as it had before life emerged. The silence echoed the first stillness, when creation waited to be shaped. Yet this time, the silence followed correction rather than anticipation. Impermanence became clear in this stillness. What seemed unshakable had passed. What seemed eternal had ended. The flood did not argue against power. It revealed its limits. The cost of rebellion lay not only in judgment, but in absence. The world that had once been loud with ambition was quiet. What had demanded attention no longer existed. The silence allowed the truth to settle without resistance. This quiet does not press upon the listener. It invites rest. The work of correction had been completed. The earth no longer strained beneath corruption. The deep held what had been removed, and the surface waited in peace. The waters remained until their purpose was fulfilled. They did not linger beyond command. Judgment, once complete, did not continue endlessly. Restraint governed even the flood. As silence endured, the earth prepared for what would follow, though it did not yet move. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. The rhythm of creation would return in its time. This chapter closes within that stillness. The waters had done their work. The noise of the former age was gone. The world rested, quiet and cleansed, beneath heaven restored to order. When the waters began to withdraw, they did so without sound. There was no announcement of renewal, no sudden return of life. The deep receded slowly, revealing a world altered by stillness. What emerged was not triumph, but a quiet beginning. The earth appeared cleansed, yet marked by memory. The land bore no cities, no towers, no monuments of dominion. What had once shaped the horizon was gone. The surface of the world lay open and unclaimed, resting beneath renewed boundaries. Humanity began again within this simplicity. Life resumed not through conquest, but through permission. Breath returned to open air. Feet touched ground that had been emptied of excess. The world no longer carried the weight of corruption that had pressed upon it. The Nephilim were gone. Their presence did not return with the receding waters. Their dominion did not reappear beneath the sky. Strength without restraint had been removed completely, yet their story did not vanish. It lingered in memory, preserved as warning rather than legend. Scripture remembers them briefly, without admiration. Tradition recalls them with caution. Their existence stands as testimony to imbalance, not greatness. They remain as echoes of what occurs when boundaries are crossed and restraint is abandoned. The renewed world functioned within limits once more. Heaven remained set apart. Earth returned to its proper measure. Humanity resumed its place beneath order rather than domination. This restoration did not erase freedom. It clarified responsibility. The boundaries restored after the flood were not harsh. They were protective. They preserved peace by defining a place. What had been broken was not left fragile. It was strengthened through clarity. Memory played a quiet role in this renewal. The flood was not forgotten. It was carried forward as understanding. The absence of the former world spoke clearly. What had not endured was instructive. What remained was sufficient. Humility marked this beginning. Life resumed without ambition to exceed its place. Obedience returned as the path to stability. Restraint was no longer a weakness. It was recognized as wisdom. This new age did not rush forward. It unfolded gently, shaped by awareness of what had been lost and what had been preserved. The earth itself responded with patience. Growth returned in season. Life resumed without strain. The echoes of the former age served their purpose. They did not inspire fear. They provided perspective. The memory of imbalance is guarded against repetition. The story of the Nephilim endured not as fascination, but as caution. This chapter opens upon that quiet continuation. The flood had passed. Order had been restored. Mercy had endured. The earth had been given another beginning, not as replacement, but as renewal shaped by memory. The ancient record moves toward rest here, not through declaration but through stillness. What followed was not a spectacle. Life resumed within measure. As the new world settled into form, life unfolded with deliberate simplicity. Humanity moved forward without the weight of former excess. The earth no longer bore the marks of domination. What rose from the soil did so in quiet cooperation with season and care. The renewed boundaries shaped this age gently. Heaven remained above, distinct and ordered. Earth rested below, fertile and responsive. The separation between realms was no longer questioned. It was received as protection rather than restriction. Peace returned through clarity. Human memory carried the knowledge of what had been lost. The flood was not reduced to myth. It remained a lived inheritance, shaping thought and action. The absence of the former world taught more than its presence ever had. Silence instructed where words were unnecessary. The Nephilim did not return, yet their memory endured as warning. Their story passed through generations not as glory, but as a lesson. Strength without humility had not preserved them. Knowledge without obedience had not sustained them. Their absence spoke louder than their former dominion. Scripture preserved this memory with restraint. It did not dwell on their feats. It named their existence briefly and moved on. What mattered was not their power, but their consequence. Tradition carried the same weight. The past was remembered so it would not be repeated. Humanity learned again the value of restraint. Power was no longer admired without measure. Authority was tempered by responsibility. The world has been shown what happens when boundaries are crossed. Wisdom grew quietly from that understanding. Obedience regained its place, not through fear but through recognition. The flood had revealed that alignment sustains life. Resistance to order leads only to loss. This truth did not need to be enforced. It rested within memory. The earth itself reflected this restoration. Its rhythms returned. Growth followed the season. The balance between giving and receiving was restored. Creation no longer strained beneath excess. It responded to care with abundance. This age did not erase sorrow. Memory of judgment remained. Yet sorrow did not dominate. It matured into humility. What had been lost was honored through faithfulness rather than regret. The renewed world carried both mercy and justice within it. Mercy had preserved life. Justice had removed corruption. Together, they shaped a foundation that could endure. The balance between them defined stability. Human life continued without spectacle. The ordinary became sacred again. Work carried dignity. Rest carried meaning. The earth supported life without resistance. The harmony of the beginning was not fully restored, yet it was no longer broken. This chapter reflects on that quiet continuation. What remained after the flood was not perfection, but possibility. The world had been given space to begin again within wisdom gained through loss. The echoes of the past lingered, not to burden but to guide. They stood as reminders that order is fragile and obedience preserves it. The ancient record does not press this meaning forcefully. It allows it to settle gently. The listener is invited into this calm understanding. The world had passed through judgment and returned to life. What endured was sufficient. What was removed was necessary. As generations continued, the world carried forward a quieter wisdom. Life unfolded beneath open skies, no longer crowded by towering ambitions or restless striving. The earth breathed freely again. What had once been pressed beyond measure now rested within its limits. The memory of the flood remained, not as fear but as understanding. It shaped thought without demanding attention. It rested beneath daily life like a deep foundation. Humanity did not need to be reminded constantly. The absence of the former world spoke on its own. The story of the Nephilim endured as echo rather than presence. Their names did not rule the imagination. Their strength did not inspire longing. They were remembered only as evidence of imbalance. Their disappearance taught what words could not explain. Power without restraint does not endure. Scripture preserves this memory gently. It does not linger on terror. It does not dramatize judgment. It records the outcome and moves forward. This restraint itself teaches. What mattered was not the spectacle of the flood, but the restoration that followed. Humility shaped the renewed path. Humanity learned again to live within measure. Authority was no longer admired for force alone. Obedience regained its quiet dignity. The earth responded to care rather than conquest. Life resumed its slow, patient rhythm. Restraint was no longer seen as a loss. It was recognized as protection. Boundaries were understood as mercy rather than limitation. The world functioned best when each part remained within its place. This truth no longer required enforcement. It was memorable. The mercy that preserved life through judgment remained present. It did not announce itself. It endured quietly. The renewed world stood as proof that correction had not erased purpose. It had been restored. Justice, too, remained evident. The flood had not been forgotten. It stood as a line that would not be crossed again without consequence. The seriousness of moral order rested beneath the calm of the new age. This balance between mercy and justice shaped stability. Neither dominated the other. Together, they held the world in place. The earth no longer strained beneath corruption. It carried life with patience. As time moved forward, the ancient record softened its voice. It did not press urgency. It allowed rest. The story of the pre-flood world faded into memory, yet its lesson remained. The closing of this record is gentle. It does not end with command or warning. It ends with stillness. The earth continues. Life endures. Order has been restored. What remains after the flood is not perfection, but alignment. Not innocence, but wisdom. The world has been given another beginning, shaped by memory and sustained by restraint. The echoes of what was lost do not disturb the present. They guide it. They remind me without burden. They instruct without force. Thus the ancient story comes to rest. The waters have receded. Silence has passed. Life continues beneath heaven restored to order. The earth breathes again.